Hey, do you want to learn how to play the most mind-numbing, infuriatingly difficult, and reliable archetype in Limbus Company? Then you've come to the wrong place, it's just down the hall to the left. But since you're here, I might as well take you on a deep dive into everything I know about Rupture as someone who one-tricks it. Rupture is a stacking debuff from Limbus Company that deals unmitigatable bonus true damage to a target when they get struck. What is this? Okay, it's technically mitigatable, but not really. When a target with Rupture is struck, they take damage equal to the number on the left. Then, the number on the right reduces by 1. These are the potency and the count. If the count reaches 0, all Rupture is removed from the target. That's it, that's literally all it does. Rupture deals affinityless damage, meaning that your damage will never get multiplied or negated by resistances like Sinking or Tremor does. But there is a trade-off for this. Rupture units are primarily count negative. So, count negative is when a skill has more coins than count inflicted, neutral is the same amount of count in coins, and positive is more count inflicted than coins. Against a target with no Rupture on them, skills that inflict potency will inflict a corresponding count, while skills that inflict count will inflict a corresponding potency, and skills that inflict both, that's kinda just what you get. There is an exception to this. Lantern Don Quixote has 2 effects on the 3rd coin of her skill 2. On hit, inflict 2 potency, and on hit, inflict 3 count if the target has 2 or less count. If she lands this coin against a target with 1 or less Rupture count on them, the attack would first inflict 2 potency, which would inflict a corresponding 1 count. Then, the coin moves down the line to the next on hit effect. Since 1 count is lower than 2 count, the attack will inflict an additional 3 Rupture count for a grand total of 2 potency and 4 count. Fun fact, attacks consume Rupture before on hit effects. So let's backtrack to the same scenario, but this time Faust has 3 count and 1 potency. When Dawn hits Faust with that 3rd coin, she'll first deal damage, which decreases the count, then on hit effects occur. So basically this is the order that things go down. Like I said earlier, you only need to keep this in mind for Rupture, maybe Sinking, and specifically for these 2 identities. I mean, you too, I guess. Oh, speaking of Ring Sang, what about Ruptures? Rupture has a total of 3 unique debuffs: Dimensional Rift, Spark Discharge, and Talisman. Dimensional Rift applies 1 stack of Rupture count per Dimensional Rift on the target next turn. That's all it does. Spark Discharge, in a similar fashion to Rupture, gets consumed on hit, but it does nothing unless the attack was a Gloom skill. In that case, when it gets consumed, it also applies 1 Rupture count to the target. Talisman functions as a buff and a debuff. Buff-wise, it inflicts Rupture potency to whoever the user strikes. Debuff-wise, it applies Rupture potency to the user upon being struck, and both of these effects inflict potency equal to the amount of Talisman on the user. Talisman can technically stack infinitely, but they get voided at the end of the turn if the user goes above 5 stacks. Let's play a quick game. Where do you think Talisman inflicted Rupture goes in this order? Right here. Which means that every attack from someone who has Talisman on them consumes Rupture, then reapplies it before on hit effects trigger. These debuffs are pretty good. Talisman solves the issue with potency application, while Spark Discharge solves the issue with count application. And Dimensional Rift is there, I guess. With all of this in mind, Rupture's most important affinity, the one you can't play without, the one that is essential to every Rupture team, is Gloom. Rupture teams need Gloom to function. Listen, Rupture teams have too much Gluttony. It's getting to the point where it's fucking comical. Look at this! And it's not even like Sinking, where our most abundant affinity fuels our most important ego. No, it fuels nothing good. Okay, so what do we want to fuel?
자, 버텨보라고.
Gregor's AEDD. It costs 3 Gloom and 3 NVTs. And at uptype 4, he inflicts 15 Spark Discharge while also gaining 10 charge count. The Corrosion literally doesn't do anything, which is good because you don't have to spam the Corrosion for it to be useful like Rhymeshank. Though unlike Rhymeshank, the passive greatly fucks you over. Any charge that Rosespanner Gregor generates will get siphoned to another charge unit on hit, which is really bad, but it's still your most important ego. The second most important ego to fuel on a Rupture team is Yi Sang's Dimension Shredder. It costs 3 Sloth and 3 Gluttony to use, and at uptype 4, do not uptype 4. Yi Sang will spend all of his charge count to deal more damage, then, if charge count was spent, he inflicts 5 Dimensional Rift to the target. And if that wasn't enough, Yi Sang will put on his best impression of Sinking Deluge, and he will multiply the count by the potency to deal more damage. This damage in question depends on how much damage the ego did, and it will deal additional Pride damage. Oh, happy Pride! The Corrosion is also the exact same, except it inflicts 6 potency. Wow. Honestly, you don't use this ego for its active effect. You use this ego for the passive. Rambling Man makes every attack against a slower target inflict 1 rupture count to a max of 3 per turn, which makes all of Yi Seng's skills below 4 coins. At minimum, count neutral. Outis' Ebony Stem does something similar to this. At up to 4, she hits everyone on your goddamn screen. Inflicts barely anything useful, but the passive makes it so on every hit, Outis will inflict 1 bind, which is amazing for speed control, and rupture count next turn. So those are kind of the only good egos on a rupture team, besides the current best egos in the game, which rupture can somewhat fuel pretty well. Now, there are egos that have some rupture team synergy, but aren't of main importance. These being Sinclair's Branch of Knowledge, Hong Lu's Dimension Shredder, Holiday Heathcliff and Outis, Wingbeat Ishmael, Lantern Sinclair, and Effervescent Corrosion Hong Lu. Okay, this is gonna take too long, so I'm just gonna do a speedrun. Branch of Knowledge's usefulness comes from the fact that it is a potency steroid, as he'll inflict 12 rupture potency if he lands heads. The issue is the fact that you are running Branch of Knowledge. Hong Lu's Dimension Shredder will always inflict 4 Dimensional Rift. Yeah, that's kinda everything. Holiday Heathcliff requires Gluttony Resonance to get the most out of his skill, aka the most effective on a rupture team. His passive also lets 7 Heathcliff inflict an ungodly amount of potency if he has a negative effect on him. Issue is, why are you using this? Holiday Outis can apply 1 damage up to the highest resonance this turn, which for the same reasoning as Holiday Heathcliff has its uses. You know, you only have to give up Ebony Stem. Wingbeat Ishmael shreds through rupture count. The issue, Wingbeat Ishmael shreds through rupture count. Lantern Sinclair is a really good healing ego in fights where there's a lot of parts he can hit. While Fluid Sac heals everyone equally, Lantern heals everyone equity. I don't think that's how that works. His healing specifically goes to the lowest HP units on your team. His corrosion also inflicts 3 rupture count, which is pretty good. Effervescent Corrosion Hong Lu. It's terrible, what? Don't use this. So now, 8 minutes later, we get to the main focus of the video. As of today, there are currently 27 identities which inflict rupture in their kit, and they are all currently on your screen. Thing is, when Project Moon didn't know what to do with an identity, they just slapped rupture potency onto the skill and called it a day. So like 70% of them aren't usable. In the essence of time, I'm just gonna... Okay, now we're just left with units that inflict pure count. So how do we gauge which ones we should use on a rupture team? Well, you could always go and look at the tier lists and trust YouTuber opinions, you know, disregard everything that you know. You should listen to another person on the internet. And especially this video because, well, I'm right. So when we pick units for a rupture team, the most important thing for you to keep in mind is their net count application. What? You don't want to do the math yourself? Don't worry, I'll handle it. I've made a not-so-easy-to-comprehend chart to display all the information you'd need about rupture units. And before I start filling it out, credits to eugh, I don't know, who probably made the chart that I referenced when making mine. And since rupture is only as effective as the amount of coins hitting the target, I've also included the amount of coins on each respective skill. And just before we start, we're going to quickly take a gander at the key below the graph. Red numbers represent how count negative a skill is. These skills will only harm the rupture count when used. Light green numbers represent how count positive a skill is. The value represents how much count a skill inflicts after accounting for the amount of coins on that skill. Orange numbers represent how much count a skill inflicts against a target with 1 or less rupture count on them. This is exclusive to skills that inflict count on their last coin. Teal numbers represent a possible range of count inflicted. The amount depends on a variable in that unit's kit. These variables are charge count, K-Corp ampules, poise, and gambling. Dark green numbers represent clash win inflicted count. These skills could give less of a fuck about the target's current rupture. Pink numbers represent the conditional on Lantern Don Quixote's second skill. It's just for her. Dark blue numbers represent the amount of count a skill inflicts when the target has spark discharge on them. These skills are gloom skills. Yellow numbers represent the amount of count a skill inflicts with an ego passive activated. Finally, purple numbers represent the amount of count a skill inflicts with both an ego passive activated and spark discharge on the target. Cool, that's everything. Let's go look at our first unit, Corp Gregor. He has a total of 7 coins in his kit, and he inflicts a total of 0 count and 1 source of potency. Corp Gregor also has a lot of healing in his kit, yet he cannot tank for shit, as he gets staggered in 1 attack. Corp Gregor is suffering from a pathogen known as power creep, and we can only hope for an ego to drop or an uptie 5 to save him. I love this unit, but please do not use him. Now, Rosespanner Gregor, on the other hand, is the man of the hour on a rupture team. The father of spark discharge, the giver of charge count, and a dog shit identity. His skill 2 is either count positive by 1 when hitting a rupture stack, or count positive by 2 when starting a rupture stack. His skill 3 has a really lengthy requirement to inflict count. For it to inflict rupture count, he needs to win the clash. Okay, go unopposed, Burst Tremor have 1 to 4 charge count, and only at 4 charge will it be count positive. It's also a Gloom skill, so bare minimum, net neutral. Rosespanner Gregor is a core Rupture unit as long as you're doing anything other than Kanto content. He is really bad. Corp Hong Lu is the best tank in the game, with 4 health bars, aggro, and high coin count. What doesn't he have? Count! So in exchange for his unending health bar, Corp Hong Lu lost all of his Rupture count application. And no, his skill 3 does not count. He has to be on death's door to inflict any Rupture count. He's 100% a core unit for Kanto content and specific boss fights where you need a tanky unit. But outside of those scenarios, he's a very, very below average Rupture unit. Talisman Sinclair is your most important Rupture unit for the first 2 turns. Let me show you what I mean by this.
최선을 다해보지. 방금 벌레 말은 듣지 않다는 사람 누구야? 가서 할 수 있는 건 다 해보고 오라고.
So, despite the fact that he's count negative on everything, he is your most important Rupture unit, period. Dead Rabbit Meursault.
I want you to have it.
I don't really want this.
Dead Rabbit Meursault should only be used if you have nobody who could take his spot. I love the concept of this identity too. He exclusively clashes high. He rolls pretty averagely. He just doesn't inflict count. The only skill that inflicts Rupture count is a clash win on his skill 2, and it only makes it net neutral, while his skill 3 has the most soul-crushing clash win effect to look at. Why don't you inflict Rupture count? You would at least be a usable Rupture unit. Do not use Dead Rabbit Meursault. LCCB Ryoshu is in a similar boat. She would be an honestly viable pick for a 6th member if not for her inability to maintain poise, terrible coin count, requiring a crit for her skill 3 to be count positive. Did I mention her inability to maintain poise? Her only method of getting poise count is through her skill 1, and it gives a total of 2 count. The only way she can realistically land that 3 coin crit is if she spends 2 turns using her skill 1. If she lands that crit against a target with no Rupture, she can set up a really mean Rupture stack. 8 potency and 4 count is the highest that any Rupture unit can start a stack with. She just has no method of maintaining her poise count. LCCB Ishmael surprisingly hasn't fallen off. She's really good. Her skill 2 is a Gloom skill, which bare minimum makes it count neutral. It also inflicts a whole lot of tremor for her and Rosespanner Gregor to profit off of. Then we look at her skill 3. It inflicts 5 fragile and 4 Rupture count. It is by default count neutral, and if she's somehow one of the first units to act, she can also set up a 50% damage boost for your whole team. LCCB Ishmael will never harm the Rupture count, but she will never add to it. Really good unit. 7 Heathcliff is the #1 support Rupture unit. Not a support by he can buff your units, but support in he inflicts way too much potency. Holy shit. His passive grants him +1 potency to all of his Rupture applying skills, and stack that with all the Rupture inflicting support passives and you get the best potency inflictor in the game. That's not all. His skill 2 inflicts 1 Rupture count on Clash Win, then inflicts an additional 2 count on the actual coin. This makes him the only unit who can both save a Rupture count of 1 and simultaneously raise the count. Hell, there's still more! His skill 3 has a total of 4 coins, yet is only count negative by 1. This makes for one of the best skills on any Rupture unit, since he gets to proc Rupture and Talisman 4 times while barely harming the count. The only unit who can match what he does is LCCB Ishmael, and he still outperforms her. He is 100% a core Rupture unit. While 7 Outis also got hit with the Power Creep pathogen. Her skill 2 used to be one of the best skills on any Rupture unit, as it had 2 coins and was count positive by 1. At the time, there was barely any Rupture units that were count positive at all. But now, as more and more units drop with better count application, she has fallen off hard. Her rolls, comparatively, are hot garbage. Baseline 10, 15, and 12. Even if you factor her clash power, it's still below average. Her skill 3 can roll up to an 18, clashing at a 20, but it is count negative by 3, and the only way to make it count positive is through Ebony Stem. Her main gimmick was the application of Weakness Analyzed, which made the target have a random attack type gain a 0.2 multiplier, which is good. But then 7 Faust came along and did everything Outis did, but better. 7 Faust is the core Rupture unit. Yet despite this very high status, she has 0 count positive skills. So why is she a core unit? Well, despite the fact that it'd be taken out back and shot for saying that she isn't, she's kind of overloaded as fuck and has everything a Rupture unit would want. For example, her skill 2 rolls considerably high, landing at a 16 without conditionals, and with conditionals a 22. It's also count neutral on Clash Win and a Gloom skill. skill, so it can be count positive by 0 or 3, not to mention while also inflicting weakness analyzed. And on Clash Win, her skill 3s only count negative by 1, while also being able to deal up to 50% extra damage if the target has 15 potency on them. Plus, her passive is nothing to scoff at either. It's a very consistent crit per turn. While 7 Faust may be net negative, what she offers to Rupture teams greatly outweighs the cost. Before Warp Sang, we had 7 Yi Sang, and just like 7 Outis, he rolls quite terribly. His Rupture application is surprisingly decent. His skill 1 is a Gloom skill, which makes it net neutral bare minimum. His skill 2 inflicts 1 Rupture count on Clash Win, so he's only -1 on this skill, and if we include Dimension Shredder, it becomes count positive by 1. He's not entirely terrible, he just got immediately outclassed by Warp Sang. Warp Sang has the same coin count, same affinities, but is just a better unit. So if Warp Sang is at 11 charge, his skill 2 becomes net neutral, and at 15 charge, his skill 3 becomes net positive by 2. Pretty decent. Hell, let's add in Dimension Shredder. Now all of his skills are net neutral, while his skill 2 becomes net positive by 2, and skill 3 net positive by 5. Wait! His skill 3 is also a Gloom skill. Let's add Spark Discharge. Wowzers! His skill 3 can inflict up to 8 Rupture count. He has to be a core Rupture unit. Warp Sang is not a core unit for Rupture. Trust me, there's a good explanation for this. He is a good Rupture unit, just like Corp Hong Lu. I use him on all of my Kanto content, but specifically Kanto content because of additional skill slots. In fights without additional skill slots, Warp Sang starts showing his glaring issues and how he fails as a Rupture unit. To explain what I mean, let's look at his base count application. Every single skill he has is base count negative. This only changes when he reaches 11 charge, where just his second skill becomes count neutral. And only when he goes above 15 charge does his third skill become count positive. Okay, but Dimension Shredder makes him net neutral, and with Spark Discharge, he can inflict 8 count on his skill 3. Yes, those are very valid points. Warp Sang has an amazing skill 3. After he wastes 3 turns contributing nothing, Warp Sang is massively held back by being a charge Rupture hybrid. There are so many issues with Warp Sang that I've had to make a fucking grocery list just to name them all. Until he hits 11 and 15 charge, Warp Sang will, at worst, harm the Rupture count, and at best add nothing to the Rupture count. Without outside help from other units, it takes him 3 turns bare minimum to get above 11 charge. You can technically get above 11 charge in 2 turns by using 2 of his skill 2s, but then you just used up the only skill that benefits from getting 11 charge. Dimension Shredder consumes all of your charge count on use. You are forced to use Dimension Shredder on turn 1, since now you have to wait another 3 turns before reaching his conditionals. All of his count application goes away once you use his skill 3, since he gets sent right back to 0 charge after using that move. With how long it takes him to reach 15 charge, Spark Discharge will likely already be entirely consumed. He rolls considerably poor. His skill 1 and skill 2 only get an increase of +2 with conditionals met, and his skill 3 consumes all of his charge to roll a 23, which is really good. But you are losing all of your charge count, and 7, Dimension Shredder's passive, Rambling Man, can inflict up to 3 Rupture count based on Yi Sang's coin count. And Warp Sang has both a single coin skill and a 2 coin skill, meaning that just by using Warp Sang, you are losing 3 Rupture count per turn, and because of this low coin count, he sucks at proccing Rupture, sucks at proccing Talisman, sucks at adding to the count, yet despite all this, people think he's one of the best units in the game? What? Do they look at his kit and go, wow, that's a lot of Rupture? No, it's not! Oh, okay. Look, he's a good unit, not a good Rupture unit. It's like Corp Hong Lu. Alright, now let's look at the objectively better Warp Sang. His skill 1 is a Gloom skill, so he can very frequently take advantage of Spark Discharge, not to mention while also having a 20% chance to inflict an additional 2 Rupture count, while his skill 2 is fucking absurd. I don't even think I need to go over it. Everyone has talked about it. It's such a stupid skill. With just Talisman on the target, Ring Sang has an 80% chance to re-roll that coin. Because Talisman is a debuff, and Talisman applies potency before on hit effects, if he lands that 80%, the target now has bleed, making it an 100% chance to land the reroll. Holy shit. On Rupture, Ring Sang is guaranteed to land the 2 coin reroll, while also having a 20% chance to inflict 3 Rupture count. If you land both rerolls, he has a 51.2% chance to not inflict Rupture, 40% chance to inflict 3 count, 8% to inflict 6 count, and a 0.8% chance to inflict 9 count. So basically you have a 50-50 whether or not he's count neutral or count negative. But with Rambling Man, you have a 50% chance to be count positive by 3 or more. It's fucking stupid! Not to mention with how many persistent debuffs Rupture has, Ring Sang is near damned guaranteed to get that 125% bonus damage on the 4th coin. Ring Sang is insanely viable on Rupture solely because of how little count other units inflict. On teams like Sinking, he's a bit below average, but Rupture, he has higher count application than 90% of the units.
But wait, he's not on a bleed team. He'll never hit his conditionals. Won't he roll like ass?
No, he still outrolls other Rupture units. And finally, we get to Lantern Don Quixote. Her skill 2 is specifically count neutral if they have 5 or 4 Rupture count on them, not to mention being able to set up a really mean Rupture stack if the target has no Rupture on them. She also has the only baseline count positive skill 1 out of any Rupture unit, which is really good. And her skill 3, holy shit, it heals her for all of her HP bar, can have 4 coins, is a gloom skill, and is base count neutral. My god, what doesn't she have? Oh, yeah, she can't roll for shit. Alright, and that's everyone. If we mash all of their things together in one chart, we get this chart, which took me way too long to make, I'm not gonna lie. But, since you've made it this far, I'm going to kindly shill and ask you to subscribe down below. It would mean a lot to me, and yeah, whatever people say. Alright, let's go and build a team. For Kanto content, you want to grab your 2 main carries first. These will be Warp Sang and 7 Faust. And you can't take 7 Faust without 7 Heathcliff. And you'd be a fool to not take Lantern Don Quixote. And since this is story content, we might as well take Corp Hong Lu. The 6th slot is personal preference. I prefer LCCB Ishmael or Talisman Sinclair, but it's really up to you. Now, for boss content, you want to kill the frauds on this team and then take the actual carries. These being Talisman Sinclair, Rosespanner Gregor, and Ring Sang. The issue is you don't have much sloth generation, so you might want to take Warp Sang, but if you do not mind the lack of sloth generation, Ring Sang all the way. Or LCCB Ishmael. Great, let's go into combat now. Turn 1, your main focus should be on Talisman Sinclair. You're going to restart until he has his skill 2 and skill 3. I'm sorry, that's just kind of how you play Rupture. It's boring, it's stupid, but it's the most effective way. Then, once you have it, you're either going to have to do mental math in your head to make sure that when Talisman Sinclair attacks, the opponent only has 1 or less Rupture count on them. Otherwise, he's going to get 6 Talisman and void his stacks at the end of the turn. Once he has 5 stacks, you want to go unopposed with his skill 2. Why? Because you can lose the clash. And if that happens, well, restart again. I like to avoid that hassle, so I just go unopposed. Then, you just wail on the boss with your best skills and spam egos when available. That's it. That's Rupture. What do you mean you'd rather play Sinking?